The Galactic Council chamber sat in the heart of Nexus Prime, a massive station that floated between three stars. Inside, representatives from 847 different species gathered to make decisions that affected trillions of lives across 12,000 star systems. The Council had existed for almost 10,000 years, and in all that time, no one had seriously challenged their authority. Ambassador Thyrix stood before the viewing screen in his private quarters, looking at the small blue planet called Earth. He was a Zeltharan, tall and reptilian, with golden scales that marked his high rank. His people had been part of the Council for 6,000 years. They were warriors, conquerors, and they knew how to deal with upstart species who forgot their place. Earth had joined the Council only 50 years ago. 50 years. It was nothing. A blink of an eye. The humans were primitives who had barely figured out how to leave their own star system when the Council found them. They were violent, emotional, and worst of all, they asked too many questions. Questions about Council rules. Questions about trade agreements. Questions about why some species had more rights than others. Thyrix had voted against letting humans join. So had most of the older species. But the Council Charter required them to offer membership to any species that developed faster than light travel. It was an old rule, written when the Council actually believed in cooperation and equality. Thyrix thought it was a stupid rule. Not all species deserved a seat at the table. Now humanity had crossed a line, and Thyrix would enjoy putting them back in their place. He walked through the clean white corridors of the orbital station that humans called Gateway 1. It orbited Earth, a meeting place between the planet and the rest of the galaxy. Human guards stood at attention as he passed, their primitive kinetic weapons useless against his personal shield. They looked nervous. Good. They should be. President Sarah Chen waited for him in the main conference room. She was a short woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Next to her sat Admiral Marcus Webb and General James Torres, the heads of Earth's military forces. All three stood as Thyrix entered, which was proper. At least humans understood basic respect. Ambassador Thyrix, President Chen said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." Thyrix remained standing. He enjoyed looking down at them. "I am here to deliver a message from the Council's Supreme Director. You will listen and you will comply." The President's face remained calm, but Thyrix saw her hands tighten on the edge of the table. Fear. "Excellent. The Council has become aware of unauthorized weapons development in your outer solar system," Thyrix continued. "You have been conducting research beyond the limits of your Council-approved technology tier. This is a violation of membership protocols." "We haven't violated anything," Admiral Webb said, his voice hard. "Our research stations are working on propulsion systems and energy generation. That's within our rights." Thyrix's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Humans always smelled of stress chemicals when they lied. "The Council has evidence of weapons testing. You will immediately cease all research. You will surrender your military fleet to Zeltharan custody for inspection, and you will accept Council monitoring stations throughout your solar system." "That's insane," General Torres said, standing up. "You're asking us to give up our sovereignty." "I am not asking," Thyrix said coldly. "I am telling you what will happen. You have 48 hours to comply. If you refuse, the Council will take corrective measures." President Chen looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of corrective measures?" "The kind that primitive species remember for generations." Thyrix allowed himself a small smile. "The Council has been very patient with humanity. We allowed you to join despite your violent history. We gave you access to trade routes and technology. We treated you as equals even though you are clearly not. And this is how you repay our generosity? By secretly developing weapons?" "We're not developing weapons," President Chen said quietly. "We're trying to understand the technology you gave us. We're trying to improve it. That is not your place." Thyrix's voice rose, echoing in the small room. "Young species do not improve upon the work of their elders. You learn, you obey. You know your place among your betters." The silence that followed was heavy. President Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. "Your betters," she repeated softly. "Yes. The Council has maintained peace and order for 10,000 years. We know what is best. Humanity has been part of the galaxy for barely a moment. And you already think you can challenge rules that have worked since before your species learned to make fire." Thyrix turned toward the door. 48 hours, President Chen. Choose wisely. As he left the room, Thyrix felt satisfied. The humans would comply. They always did. Every species learned the same lesson eventually. The council was too powerful, too vast, too old to fight. Resistance was suicide. What Thyrix didn't know, what the council didn't know, was that humanity had indeed been conducting research in the outer solar system. But it wasn't weapons research. It was something far more significant. 3 years ago, a human science vessel had discovered a derelict ship drifting in the Oort cloud, the dark region beyond Pluto where comets were born. The ship was old, impossibly old, older than the council itself. When human engineers studied it, they found something extraordinary. The ship contained the master control system for the galaxy's faster-than-light network. Every FTL jump, every hyperspace lane, every quick journey between stars used the same underlying technology. And that technology wasn't natural. It had been built deliberately by whoever created the ancient ship. More importantly, it had been built with limits. The network allowed travel along specific routes at specific speeds. It created a cage, invisible but absolute, that controlled where species could go and how fast they could expand. The council had never mentioned this. In fact, the more humanity studied the system, the more it looked like the council's founders had deliberately hidden the truth. They had taken a tool meant for all species and turned it into a mechanism of control. President Chen sat in the conference room long after Thyrix left. Admiral Webb and General Torres waited, knowing better than to speak first. They killed the Vaxil, Chen finally said. 20 years ago, when the Vaxil refused council orders, they sterilized 3 planets. Billions dead. Yes, ma'am, Webb said, and the Torgathi, and the Melnari. Every species that challenged the council was crushed. Chen stood and walked to the window, looking down at Earth below, her home. 7 billion people who had no idea how close they were to annihilation. Have we finished the work? She asked. Webb nodded. The new network is ready. We can activate it in minutes. But ma'am, if we're wrong about this, then we die, Chen said simply. But if we're right, if the council really has been controlling the galaxy through the FTL network, then we have a chance. A small chance, but better than surrendering. What are your orders? General Torres asked. President Chen turned from the window. Her tired eyes were hard now, filled with the same determination that had driven humanity to climb down from trees, to cross oceans, to reach for the stars. Send a message to all our ships. Tell them to prepare for Alpha Protocol, and get me aligned to the science teams at Titan Station. It's time to show the Council what humanity found in the dark. The 48-hour countdown had begun. Neither side knew it yet, but in 2 days the galaxy would change forever. 47 hours had passed. President Chen stood in the command center deep beneath Geneva, surrounded by screens showing data from across Earth and the solar system. Every military leader on the planet was connected to this room. Every ship captain, every station commander. They were all waiting for her decision. On the main screen, Ambassador Thyrix appeared, broadcast from Nexus Prime. Behind him stood Supreme Director Malthus, a being that looked like a living shadow with too many eyes. Malthus had led the Council for 600 years. Some said he was the most powerful individual in the galaxy. President Chen, Thyrix said, his voice dripping with false politeness. Your time has expired. Have you made the wise choice? Chen looked directly at the camera, her face calm. Ambassador Thyrix, Supreme Director Malthus. Earth has carefully reviewed your demands. We have consulted with our legal experts, our scientists, and our people, and we must respectfully decline. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Thyrix's scales seemed to darken. You decline? Yes. Our research is purely defensive and falls well within the rights granted to us under the Council Charter. We will not surrender our fleet. We will not accept foreign monitoring stations. And we will not be bullied. Chen paused. We wish to continue as productive members of the Council, but we will not surrender our sovereignty. Productive members? Malthus spoke for the first time, his voice like wind through a graveyard. You are insects, microbes, a species so young you barely understand the technology you use. And you dare refuse a direct order from the Council? We dare to stand up for our rights, Chen said quietly. Malthus leaned forward, and his many eyes seemed to look directly through the screen. Then you will learn what happens to species who forget their place. Thyrix, send the Third Fleet, make an example of them. The transmission ended. In the command center, no one spoke for a moment. Then Admiral Webb let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "now we find out if we were right." The Zeltheran Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system 18 hours later. 200 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They had crushed 12 rebellions over the past 3 centuries. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could withstand nuclear fire. Fleet Commander Zorath sat on his command throne, watching the blue planet on his screen. Such a small, insignificant world. He had destroyed dozens like it. "This would be quick. All ships maintain formation," he ordered. "Broadcast surrender terms on all channels." The message went out in every human language. "Attention, Earth, you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. Disable all military assets. Prepare to receive occupation forces. If you comply, casualties will be minimal. If you resist, we will burn your cities one by one until you beg for mercy." Zorath settled back to wait. They always surrendered. Fear was a wonderful motivator. 59 minutes passed. No response came from Earth. Zorath felt a flicker of annoyance. These humans were more stubborn than most. "Time's up," he said. "Target their lunar colony. Full power. Let's show them we're serious." Luna Colony was humanity's first permanent off-world settlement. 50,000 people lived there, mining helium-3 and rare earth metals. There were families there, children, schools, parks, a whole community that had grown over 3 decades. The Zeltheran fleet fired. 50 massive energy beams converged on the colony's domes. The shields held for exactly 2 seconds, then collapsed. The beams punched through metal and stone and ceramic. They vaporized air and water and flesh. They turned Luna Colony into a crater of melted rock and scattered debris. 50,000 lives ended in an instant. No warning. No evacuation. Just sudden, absolute death. Zorath watched the destruction with satisfaction. "Send the feed to Earth. Tell them that's what happens when they waste our time. Tell them they have 1 more hour, and then we start on their cities." On Earth, in the command center, every person watched the footage of Luna Colony's destruction. Some were crying. Some were frozen in shock. President Chen stared at the screen, her face like stone. "Ma'am," Admiral Webb said softly, "we have families up there. My niece, she was teaching at the school." Chen closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, they were filled with something cold and absolute. "How many children?" 12,000, someone reported, their voice breaking. 12,000 children. "Get me a direct line to every council world," Chen said, her voice deadly quiet. "Get me every communication channel in the galaxy. I want everyone to hear this." The technicians worked frantically. Within minutes, they had hacked into the council's own communication network. President Chen's face appeared on screens across 847 worlds. Billions of beings stopped what they were doing to watch. Chen spoke 3 words. Just 3. But they carried the weight of a species' rage. "You murdered children." Then she nodded to Admiral Webb. "Alpha Protocol. Full authorization. Execute immediately." "Yes, ma'am," Webb said. He turned to his communications officer. "Send the signal. All units, no mercy. No quarter. For Luna." "For Luna," everyone in the command center repeated. In orbit around Earth, satellites that the Council had assumed were primitive sensor arrays suddenly activated. But they weren't sensors. They were quantum anchor points, placed carefully over 3 years based on what humanity had learned from the ancient ship. At the edge of the solar system, the Zeltheran Third Fleet suddenly found their ships frozen in place. Not by weapons, not by force fields. The space around them had simply stopped responding to their engines. They couldn't move forward or backward. They couldn't turn. They couldn't even fire their weapons. The quantum anchors had created a bubble of locked space-time, and the fleet was trapped inside it. "What is this?" Zorath roared, slamming his fist on his throne. "What have they done?" His communication officer looked up, face pale. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. From Earth." On Zorath's screen, a woman in a military uniform appeared. She wore the insignia of an admiral. Her name tag read Okonkwo. "Commander Zorath," Admiral Sarah Okonkwo said, her voice calm and clear. "You just murdered 50,000 civilians, including 12,000 children. You did this to frighten us, to make us submit. You failed. You cannot hold us forever," Zorath snarled. "The moment your trap fails, we will reduce your planet to ash." "You're not going anywhere," Okonkwo said. And you need to understand something. We didn't develop weapons in the outer solar system. We discovered the truth about the FTL network. We know what the Council has been hiding. We know how you've controlled the galaxy for 10,000 years. And we've built our own network. A better one. One that gives us access to every star system simultaneously. She paused and her expression hardened. You crossed the line when you killed children to prove a point. Now let me show you what humanity can do when you really make us angry. This message is being broadcast to every Council world, to every species. We're going to pull back the curtain on the Council's lies, and then we're going to give you all one chance to surrender. Surrender. Zorath laughed. You're a single species. The Council has 10,000 ships. We have weapons that can destroy stars. You're nothing. We were nothing, Okonkwo corrected. But you made us into something else. You made us into the species that will end the Council. Starting now, the transmission ended. On Nexus Prime in the Council chamber, Supreme Director Malthus watched the recording with his many eyes. For the first time in 600 years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Fear. The Council chamber on Nexus Prime had never been so crowded. Representatives from all 847 member species packed the massive room, their voices creating a noise like a disturbed hive. Everyone had seen Admiral Okonkwo's broadcast. Everyone knew that humanity had somehow trapped the Third Fleet, and everyone wanted answers. Supreme Director Malthus stood at the center podium, his shadow form seeming to absorb the light around him. He raised one appendage and silence fell immediately. Even after 10,000 years, the Council respected power. The human situation will be resolved shortly, Malthus announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. They have played a clever trick, but it is only a trick. The moment their trap fails, Commander Zorath will complete his mission. Earth will serve as an example to any other species considering rebellion. But what did the human admiral mean? Asked Representative Callis of the Vorin. She spoke of secrets, of the FTL network being controlled. Lies, Malthus said smoothly. Desperate fabrications from a species facing extinction. The FTL network is a natural phenomenon that we learn to navigate. Nothing more. As if in response to his words, every screen in the chamber suddenly activated. Admiral Okonkwo appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood President Chen and a woman in a white lab coat. Director Malthus, Okonkwo said. I see you're calling us liars. Let me introduce Dr. Elizabeth Park, head of Earth's FTL Research Division. Dr. Park, please explain what we found. The scientist stepped forward, adjusting her glasses nervously, but her voice was steady. 3 years ago, we discovered a derelict vessel in our outer solar system. Carbon dating puts it at approximately 15,000 years old. Inside, we found what we initially thought was a navigation computer. But it's actually much more. She pulled up a holographic display that appeared on every screen. It showed a complex web of lines connecting stars across the galaxy. This is the FTL network as it currently exists. Every hyperspace lane, every jump point, every route that Council ships use. Now watch what happens when I access the command protocols we found. The display changed. The web of lines shifted, compressed, and suddenly new connections appeared. Thousands of them, routes between stars that should have been impossible, faster paths, more direct paths, ways to cross the galaxy that the Council had never mentioned. The network isn't natural, Dr. Park continued. It was built, deliberately engineered by a species that existed before the current Council. And whoever built it included a control system, a way to limit access, to create artificial barriers, to make certain routes available while hiding others. Malthus's many eyes narrowed. Even if this were true, even if the network was built, we discovered it. We learned to use it. That gives us the right to control it. You didn't discover it, President Chen cut in. Your ancestors stole it. We've accessed the historical records stored in the ancient ship. The Council's founders found this network 5,000 years before the current calendar, but instead of sharing it freely, they used it to establish control. They made themselves into gods by controlling the one thing every species needs to expand beyond their home system. She pulled up another display. This one showed text in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. These are the original instructions left by the network's builders. They're very clear. The system was meant to be free and open. Anyone who achieved FTL capability was supposed to gain full access, but your founders rewrote the protocols. They created tiers, levels. They gave newer species restricted access while keeping the best routes for themselves. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives were shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. Some of the older species looked uncomfortable, as if they had suspected this truth for a long time. Silence, Malthus roared. The chamber went quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now. Uncertain, fearful. Even if these accusations were true, what does it matter? The Council has brought order to the galaxy. We have prevented wars. We have facilitated trade. The system works. The system works for you, Admiral Okonkwo said coldly. But we've also found records of what happened to species that got too powerful, too independent. The Vaxil, for example. 20 years ago, you told everyone they had developed illegal weapons and refused Council orders. But the truth is different, isn't it, Director? Malthus didn't respond, but his form seemed to shrink slightly. The Vaxil discovered the same thing we did, Okonkwo continued. They found evidence of the control system. They demanded it be open to everyone. And you sterilized 3 of their planets to silence them. You called it enforcement. We call it genocide. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into the camera. And now you've done it again. You murdered 50,000 humans, including 12,000 children, for the crime of asking questions, for the crime of trying to learn, for the crime of refusing to bow. You cannot prove any of this, Malthus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. We don't need to prove it, President Chen said quietly, because we're going to give you one chance, one opportunity to do the right thing. Surrender yourselves for trial. Face justice for your crimes against the Vaxil, the Torgathi, the Melnari, and every other species you've crushed over the millennia. Dismantle the control system and open the network to everyone. And most importantly, surrender for the murder of Luna Colony. And if we refuse? Malthus asked. Admiral Okonkwo's expression turned to stone. Then we'll show you what a species can do when you take away their chains. We've spent 3 years rebuilding the network. We didn't just crack your control codes. We improved them. Right now we have full access to every star system in Council space. We can move ships anywhere instantly, without using your restricted lanes. She pulled up a new display. It showed 3,000 red dots appearing simultaneously across 47 different star systems. These are human vessels. We deployed them all in the last 30 seconds. They're currently in orbit around every Council homeworld, not approaching from the edges of the system where your defenses could stop them. Already there, already in position, already targeting your military installations. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives were screaming into their communication devices, calling their homeworlds. Alarms were going off across the galaxy as defense systems detected the human ships that had appeared out of nowhere. This is an act of war, Malthus shouted. An invasion. No, Chen said calmly. This is a demonstration. We've had ships in position for the past 15 minutes. If we wanted to attack, your military infrastructure would already be destroyed. We're showing you that we can reach you instantly, anywhere. Your defenses mean nothing when we can bypass them completely. So what do you want? Malthus demanded. I told you, surrender for justice. Face trial for your crimes. Step down from power peacefully. Chen's voice was firm. You have 12 hours to decide. If you refuse or if you attempt to attack Earth again, we will dismantle the Council by force. And given what you did to Luna Colony, we will not be gentle. You're bluffing, Malthus said. You don't have the forces to fight the entire Council. We have 10,000 ships in the Grand Armada. We have weapons that have existed since before your species discovered fire. You're right, Okonkwo agreed. In a straight fight in open space, you probably have the advantage. Your ships are bigger. Your weapons are more powerful. But this isn't going to be a straight fight. We're not going to line up and trade shots with you. We're going to appear inside your defenses. We're going to strike faster than you can respond. And we're going to use the one advantage you can't match. What advantage? Malthus asked, his voice bitter. We're angry, Okonkwo said simply. You killed our children. You attacked civilians to make a point. And now every human in this system, on this planet, in this fleet, has one single goal. Making sure you never get the chance to do it again. To anyone, she leaned back. 12 hours, Director. Choose wisely. Because if you choose wrong, the Council that has existed for 10,000 years will be a memory by tomorrow morning. The transmission ended. In the Council chamber, Malthus looked around at the representatives. He saw fear in their eyes. Doubt. The kind of doubt that toppled empires, But Malthus hadn't held power for 600 years by showing weakness. He drew himself up and his voice rang with authority. The humans are primitives with a new toy. They don't understand the forces they're playing with. We will mobilize the Grand Armada. We will crush Earth. And we will remind the galaxy why the Council rules. The vote was called. It passed by a wide margin. War it would be. The Grand Armada began gathering near Nexus Prime exactly 1 hour after the Council voted for war. Ships arrived through hyperspace from every corner of Council territory. Massive dreadnoughts that could crack moons. Carrier vessels holding thousands of fighters. Cruisers with weapons that could boil oceans. 10,000 warships representing the combined might of 847 species. All coming together for one purpose. To destroy humanity. Fleet Marshal Vaxon commanded the Armada from his flagship, the Pride of Ages. He was old even by Council standards, and had fought in every major conflict for the past 4 centuries. He had crushed rebellions, stopped invasions, and enforced the Council's will across the galaxy. He had never lost. All ships report status, he ordered. Reports flooded in. Every vessel was combat ready. Shields at maximum. Weapons charged. Crew at battle stations. It was the largest military force assembled in 2,000 years. Vaxon studied the tactical display. The human ships were still in orbit around Council worlds, but they hadn't attacked. They were just sitting there waiting. It made him uneasy. He had expected them to fire the moment the Council refused their demands, but instead they held position. Maybe they're smart enough to realize they're outmatched, his tactical officer suggested. Maybe, Vaxon said, but he didn't believe it. Humans were aggressive, impulsive, emotional. Everything he had read about them suggested they would attack first and think later. The fact that they were waiting meant they had a plan. He didn't like it when the enemy had a plan. Jump coordinates set for Earth's solar system, his navigator reported. Will arrive just outside their defensive perimeter. All ships prepare to jump on my mark, Vaxon ordered. 3, 2, 1, mark. The Armada vanished from Nexus Prime space and reappeared near Earth. At least, that was what should have happened. Instead, the moment Vaxon gave the command, his view screen exploded with warnings. The ships were jumping, but not to Earth. The FTL network was routing them somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. His fleet was scattering across a dozen different systems, arriving in small groups instead of one overwhelming force. What's happening? Vaxon roared. The network, it's not responding to our commands, his navigator said, frantically working his controls. It's like someone changed all the routes. The humans, Vaxon realized. They're controlling the network. They're splitting our fleet. Before he could issue new orders, the human ships moved. All 3,000 of them simultaneously across 47 star systems. They didn't wait for the Council forces to organize. They didn't try to negotiate. They just attacked. On the Zeltharan homeworld, Admiral Korvax watched in horror as 12 human vessels appeared directly above his primary shipyard. He had 30 ships defending the facility, but before he could order them to fire, the human ships unleashed a storm of missiles and energy beams. The shipyard, which had been building warships for 3,000 years, exploded in a fireball, visible from the planet's surface. Return fire, Korvax screamed. His ships opened up with everything they had, but the human vessels flickered and vanished. They didn't retreat through normal space. They just disappeared, as if they had never been there. A second later, they reappeared behind his fleet and fired again. 3 of his ships exploded before they could turn. On the Varine homeworld, Representative Callis watched from the Council building as human ships struck the military command center. The building, protected by shields that could withstand nuclear weapons, collapsed in seconds. The humans weren't using nuclear weapons or antimatter. They were using something else, something that seemed to ignore shields entirely. On world after world, the pattern repeated. Human ships would appear, strike military targets with devastating precision, then vanish before defenders could respond. Command centers, orbital platforms, weapons factories, research stations. Every target was military. Every strike was calculated, but the sheer speed and coordination were overwhelming. The humans were fighting in 47 systems at once, and they seemed to know exactly where to hit, exactly when to strike, and exactly how to avoid counterattack. Back on the Pride of Ages, Vaxon tried desperately to organize a defense. His flagship had jumped to a system near the Torgathi homeworld, along with 200 other council ships. It wasn't the full armada, but it should be enough to stop a few dozen human vessels. Enemy contacts appearing on sensors, his tactical officer reported. 20 ships bearing down on the planetary defense grid. All ships intercept formation, Vaxon ordered. Show these humans what real warriors can do. The council ships moved to engage. Their weapons were older, more powerful, built with technology refined over millennia. They fired, and space lit up with energy. Several human ships took hits, their shields flaring, but the humans didn't retreat. Instead, they accelerated directly into the council formation. Vaxon realized too late what they were doing. They weren't trying to win a ship-to-ship battle. They were using the council vessels as cover, getting close enough that the planetary defenses couldn't fire without hitting friendly ships. Then the human vessels vanished again, reappearing on the other side of the defense grid. They fired at point-blank range, and the grid's generators exploded. Without the grid, the planet was defenseless, but the humans didn't attack the planet. They turned their weapons on the military starbase in orbit, reducing it to debris in seconds. Then they jumped away, leaving the council fleet chasing shadows. They're not fighting to win, Vaxon said, suddenly understanding. They're fighting to destroy our military capability. They're crippling us, and it was working. Reports kept coming in from across the galaxy. Shipyards destroyed. Command centers obliterated. Weapons platforms disabled. The humans were systematically dismantling the Council's military infrastructure, and they were doing it faster than anyone thought possible. Sir, the main armada is trying to regroup at Nexus Prime, his communication officer reported. Fleet Marshal Torvash is requesting all ships return immediately. Tell him we're on our way, Vaxon said grimly. Maybe if they could concentrate their forces, they could mount a proper defense. The Pride of Ages jumped back to Nexus Prime, along with the rest of the scattered armada. Vaxon felt a moment of relief when he saw thousands of ships appearing in the system. They were battered, damaged, but still functional. Still dangerous. Then the human fleet arrived. All 3,000 ships appearing in perfect formation directly in front of the Council armada. The moment the humans appeared, every Council vessel opened fire at once. The volume of firepower was staggering, enough to sterilize a planet. The human ships' shields took the hits, absorbed the energy, and held. Then the humans returned fire. But they weren't aiming at individual ships. They were using coordinated strikes with dozens of vessels focusing on single targets. Council ships exploded one after another, their shields overwhelmed by the concentrated assault. Vaxon watched his tactical display in growing horror. The humans were outmaneuvering the armada, outthinking it, outfighting it. They appeared and disappeared at will, striking from unexpected angles, focusing fire in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. And they had another advantage. The Council fleet was made up of 847 different species, each with their own command structure, their own tactics, their own communication protocols. They were powerful individually, but they couldn't coordinate the way the humans did. The human fleet moved like a single organism, like a school of fish or a flock of birds. Every ship seemed to know what every other ship was doing. Their artificial intelligence systems, developed from centuries of gaming and warfare simulations, predicted enemy movements and coordinated responses in milliseconds. We're losing, Vaxon's tactical officer said, his voice shaking. We have superior numbers, superior firepower, but we're still losing. Vaxon wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. In 11 minutes of combat, the Council had lost over 3,000 ships. The humans had lost less than 200. At this rate, the entire armada would be destroyed within the hour. All ships retreat to Nexus Prime, Vaxon ordered. Form defensive positions around the station. The armada fell back, taking shelter near the massive station. Maybe the humans wouldn't risk firing near such a large civilian population. Maybe they could use it as a shield. But the human ships didn't pursue. Instead, they formed a perimeter around the system, blocking all jump points. Then a transmission came through on all channels. Admiral Okonkwo appeared on every screen. Council forces, you have fought bravely. But this battle is over. We have disabled or destroyed 70% of your military infrastructure across 47 systems. Your Grand Armada is broken. You cannot win, she paused. Surrender now, and we promise fair treatment under the laws of war. You will be detained, but not harmed. Your families will not be touched. Your worlds will not be bombarded. We are not here to conquer. We are here to end the Council's tyranny. And if we refuse? Vaxon asked, his voice bitter. Then we will finish what we started, Okonkwo said simply, and more people will die for no reason. The outcome is already decided, Marshal. Don't make it worse. Vaxon looked at his tactical display. She was right. His fleet was shattered. His weapons were depleted. His crew was exhausted. The Pride of Ages was the first Council ship to be boarded. Vaxon watched through the security cameras as human Marines cut through the airlock and poured into his flagship. They moved with frightening efficiency, clearing corridors and securing sections in minutes. His crew didn't resist. What would be the point? When the Marines reached the bridge, Vaxon stood to meet them. He expected to be shot, executed on the spot. Instead, the lead Marine, a woman with sergeant stripes, simply gestured to the door. Marshal Vaxon, you're under arrest for war crimes. Come with us, please. War crimes? Vaxon laughed bitterly. I was following orders. So were the people who ran the concentration camps on Old Earth, the sergeant said. We learned that following orders isn't an excuse. Not when the orders are evil. They took him to a transport ship that jumped directly to Earth. Vaxon expected a military prison, maybe torture, maybe a quick execution. Instead, they brought him to a secure facility in Geneva, where he was given a clean cell, regular meals, and access to legal counsel. He wasn't alone. Over the next 3 days, nearly 10,000 council officers and officials were brought to Earth to face trial. The humans had captured them all in the final assault, plucking them from their homeworlds before local forces could mount a rescue. But the most important prisoners were taken elsewhere. Supreme Director Malthus and the Council's senior leadership were transported to Nexus Prime itself, which was now under human control. They would be tried there, in the chamber where they had ruled for so long. The trial lasted 2 weeks. It was broadcast to every world in the galaxy, shown on every screen, discussed in every home. President Chen herself presided, with judges from 12 different species, including several whose worlds the Council had destroyed. The charges were simple: genocide, enslavement, conspiracy, and murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The humans had accessed the Council's own records, the files that detailed every atrocity, every cover-up, every species that had been crushed for asking too many questions. The Vaxil, the Torgathi, the Melnari, 23 species in total, destroyed or enslaved over 10,000 years because they refused to submit. Trillions of lives ended to maintain the Council's power. Malthus tried to defend himself. He argued that the Council had brought peace and order, that the rules were necessary to prevent chaos, that the destroyed species had been dangerous, unstable, threatening to everyone else. President Chen listened patiently to every word. Then she asked a single question. Director Malthus, how many of the children killed on Luna Colony were dangerous and unstable? Malthus had no answer. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. The sentence, under humanity's own laws of warfare, was death. Not torture. Not imprisonment. Just a clean, quick execution. Malthus and the 17 other senior council members would die for their crimes. Some species protested. They argued that the council had brought progress, that the leaders were too old and important to kill, that humanity should show mercy. President Chen addressed these concerns in a speech that would be remembered for generations. We understand mercy, she said. We practice it every day. But mercy for the guilty often means cruelty to the innocent. These beings ordered the deaths of trillions. They enslaved entire species. They murdered children to prove a point. If we let them live, we send a message that power and age can protect you from justice. That message is wrong. The executions took place 17 minutes after the verdict was announced. 17 minutes, the same amount of time it took for Luna Colony to die. The symbolism was deliberate. With the Council leadership gone, humanity faced a choice. They had the power to rule the galaxy themselves, the military strength, the control of the FTL network. They could become the new Council, the new masters, and who could stop them? Admiral Okonkwo addressed this question in a transmission to all Council worlds. She stood not in a military uniform this time, but in civilian clothes. We didn't fight this war to become rulers, she said. We fought it to be free. And we believe every species deserves that same freedom. So today we're opening the FTL network to everyone. No restrictions. No tiers, no control. Any species that can build a ship can go anywhere in the galaxy. She paused. We're also proposing a new form of government. Not a council of the powerful, but an assembly where every species has an equal vote, where decisions require broad consensus, not the whim of a few leaders, where individual rights are protected by law, not dependent on which species you were born into. The proposal was radical. Many species were skeptical. Some were afraid that without the council's control there would be chaos and war. Others worried that humanity was just another would-be empire, and this was a trick to gain power. But humanity had one advantage. They had proof that they meant what they said. While the trial was happening, human engineers had been working across the galaxy, helping to rebuild the infrastructure they had destroyed. They worked alongside former enemies, teaching them how to use the new FTL system, sharing technology that the Council had kept restricted. On the Zeltharan homeworld, the 200 ships that had been trapped near Mars were given a choice. They could return home, or they could stay and face trial for Luna Colony. Most chose trial, expecting execution. Instead, they received a sentence that terrified them more than death. They would spend 20 years helping to rebuild Luna Colony. They would work alongside the families of those they had killed. They would see the faces of parents who had lost children, of children who had lost parents. They would live with the weight of what they had done. Commander Zorath, who had given the order to fire on Luna, was assigned to plant trees in the memorial garden being built on the colony's ruins. Every day he planted saplings and tended flowers in soil mixed with the ashes of the dead. Every day survivors came to watch him work. Some spat at him. Some cursed him. Some just looked at him with empty, broken eyes. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than any battle. Harder than any torture. To face the consequences of his actions day after day, year after year. But it was also the most important thing he had ever done, because it taught him something the Council never had. That actions have consequences, that orders don't absolve responsibility, that every life matters. The Galactic Assembly took 2 years to establish. It wasn't easy. Species had to learn to cooperate instead of dominate. Disputes had to be resolved through discussion instead of force. Rights had to be defined, laws had to be written, and 1,000 different cultures had to find common ground. But it worked. Slowly, carefully, imperfectly, but it worked. On the 5-year anniversary of Luna Colony's destruction, President Chen stood in the memorial garden. The trees planted by Zeltharan prisoners were growing tall now, their leaves rustling in the artificial breeze. A monument stood at the garden's center, listing the names of all 50,000 dead. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Admiral Okonkwo asked, standing beside her. "I don't know," Chen admitted. "We killed thousands of people in the war. We executed the Council leadership. We forced our vision of government on the galaxy. Maybe in 1,000 years, someone will look back at us as tyrants who replaced one empire with another. Or maybe they'll remember us as the species that freed the galaxy," Okonkwo suggested. Chen smiled slightly. "Maybe. But I think the truth will be more complicated. We're not heroes or villains. We're just people who were pushed too far and pushed back. The galaxy is free to decide what they make of that." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the names on the monument. 12,000 children, 38,000 adults, each one a universe of dreams and hopes and possibilities ended in an instant. "We will never let it happen again," Chen said quietly. "To anyone, anywhere in this galaxy, that's the promise we made on the day Luna died, and we'll keep it." Across the galaxy on 847 worlds, life continued. Species that had been enemies learned to be neighbors. Technologies that had been restricted for millennia became available to everyone. Young races that had been held back by the Council's rules began to explore and expand and create. There were problems, of course. Disputes over territory, disagreements about trade. Old hatreds that didn't die just because the Council did. But these problems were solved through law and discussion, not through fleets and fire. And watching over it all from Earth and 100 other worlds, humanity stood ready. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as guardians, ensuring that the freedom they had won would be protected. The old Galactic Council had annihilated itself the moment it crossed the line with Earth. It took 17 minutes to fall, and 10,000 years of tyranny ended in fire and justice. What rose in its place wasn't perfect, but it was something the galaxy had never truly had before. A chance, a real chance, For every species, every individual, every child born under distant stars, to live free and dream of tomorrow without fear. And that, President Chen thought as she looked at the memorial garden, was worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth building for. Because in the end, that's what made humanity truly dangerous. Not their weapons or their technology or their tactics. It was their stubborn, fierce, unbreakable belief that everyone deserved a chance to be free. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way, and it would never forget.